Hello, welcome to Scale by Design. I am very excited to have Raluca Mackey with us today. Raluca is going to be telling us about employee engagement and why, as a general partner at a VC, you should have some type of structure in place to measure that with your portfolio companies. And we're really going to be tying this to business outcomes and repeatable profitability at scale. So I'm really looking forward to this. Raluca, our guest, is the head of talent for Vertex Venture, advising 39 portfolio companies on talent strategy. Raluca, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So just to start us off, would you mind telling us a little bit about you and Vertex Ventures? What is Vertex up to these days?
Yeah, sure. So we are early stage investors. So we invest in seed and Series A, SaaS, and infrastructure startups. And we only invest in a handful of companies each year. We're currently at Fund 3 with about, like you said, 30, 39, 40 portcos. But although we do invest in early stage, we continue to support companies as they scale.
Okay, cool. And so what is your role exactly? What do you do for Vertex?
Talent roles at VCs differ very broadly from company to company. So there's really no right or wrong way to approach it. The Vertex approach is to teach companies how to fish instead of fishing for them. And that really was appealing to me because of the solution that we built together as Secure Vision. We didn't want to be another resume shop. We wanted to, yes, successfully build a great pipeline of candidates on one hand, but also truly understand the company, their unique needs, their unique challenges, and advise hiring managers on how to improve their process. And that's where the embedded strategic solution came through. And in my role at Vertex currently, although I do get to make some candidate intros, even other key intros to curated vendors like recruitment agencies, Secure Vision being one of them, the bulk of my work is on the strategy side. So not building pipeline, but helping founders, helping leaders to build an interview process that will successfully convert candidates to employees using technology, utilizing best practices, and then taking it further and ensuring portcos actually have a healthy work environment where employees can thrive.
Okay, cool. And I think for your portfolio companies, you actually just started a Talent and People newsletter, right?
Yep. First edition went out yesterday.
Okay, cool. And so you had sent over the article. It talks a lot about employee engagement, 3 pillars of employee engagement. It talks about morale amidst layoffs and the economic correction, if you will. Why now? Why is this something that you are prioritizing with the founder CEOs you partner with at this point in time?
Yeah, totally. A lot of conversations seem to have shifted from how can I build more pipeline, how can I get more candidates through, to how can I ensure the employees I currently have in place are happy in their roles. So we do see layoffs predominantly affecting bigger companies, but also some smaller. I believe within our portfolio of about 40, we have 5 that went through a round of layoffs. In this economic environment, we still see companies like smaller environments being affected as well. People are wondering how will their job, how will their company be affected, and they may suffer from an undiagnosed survivor guilt syndrome. Ironically, while all of this is happening, they're still expected to work harder, in some cases to pick up the slack from people that were laid off. And in other cases, maybe there was a slowdown or a hiring freeze, and they need to pick up new responsibilities to make up for those unfilled positions. So we see all this data that speaks to how much a company loses when there's a dip in engagement. I believe the stats are 34% of salary per disengaged employee that's lost. And we know great leaders care about employee engagement. According to a Harvard Business Review report, 71% of execs believe engagement is key to business success. So engaged employees experience lesser burnout, they perform better, they tend to stay with the company longer. And we also know how expensive turnover is, right?
Yeah, for sure. So for founder CEOs out there or general partners at VCs, like where do you get started? Like, what are the highest leverage things that leaders and companies could do to help guide the strategy? And maybe we could walk through the three pillars you outline in your article. So could you walk us through the first pillar?
Yeah, for sure. Communication, super important, of course, and that really impacts every area of the business. You want to make sure you take control of the narrative, because of course there could be a possible negative spin. So you want to make sure as leaders, as managers, you take control of that narrative and outline how your company and each team will be impacted by layoffs or the economic environment, address the volatility of the market and how that's going to impact each position, each role. Also leverage one-on-one conversations. Their employees will always be looking up at their manager. They'll want to see how they react to different reactions of the market. And so those are gold. You want to make sure during one-on-ones you promote a message that mental health and well-being are a priority, and you're supporting your team as a whole.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think too, just as you mentioned, just like transparency and expectation setting is huge. Some of the hardest parts about about challenging things in life is the uncertainty. It's almost, if it becomes a known quantity, even if it's bad, it takes, the fear or the anticipation of the unknown is the hardest part. And I think just being transparent about the finances of business, burn rate, cash flows, whatever is going on within the company that is becoming the focus, whether it's good or bad, to really dial in and make sure that you share that with the employees. I think when it comes to layoffs, there's going to be a fair amount of folks that are potentially willing to stay engaged with the company when they have transparency from leadership. You can sort of create that culture of like, we're in this together. How do we solve this problem? Smart people, A players, they like solving problems. And there's some folks out there that the more challenging the problem, the more they get engaged. But there has to be that trust and transparency. I think the other thing when it comes to layoffs and keeping folks engaged leading up to that is, I think you mentioned in your article, like, will they have medical coverage throughout the transition? I mean, if you outline a severance package and you proactively share with folks what that would look like if layoffs are required, and bake that into your timeline of, okay, opposed to waiting 3 months, we'll wait 2 months to make sure we have the capital allocated for severances. If XYZ doesn't happen, then we do it in 2 months versus 3. That stuff like that gives certainty to folks, like, well, I'm going to continue to go all in on this. And I know that worst case scenario, if I do get laid off, that this is going to be there for me and my family to help me with the transition. It's not just about money and benefits, it's also about resources, right? Are there other portfolio companies you can introduce them to? Are there other VC connections that your heads of talent at other VCs that you could introduce them to? And providing that support system. The last thing I'll say before I hand it back to you is I think, another thing that some leaders miss is you're not only building severance packages for the people that leave, you're building them for the people that stay. That, how you treat the folks that are leaving. And when I mean treat, I know companies many times have the best of intentions, but there are financial limitations to what they can do.
Sure.
But to the extent you can invest in that severance, it also shows the people that are staying that, hey, we care about our people. And also, if it happens to me, I can expect this type of behavior or outcomes from the employer. So I think, what are your thoughts on, you build severance packages just as much for the people that stay as the people that leave?
Absolutely. Your employees are always going to look at how you treat people going out, because they expect the same treatment for themselves at one point, potentially. So that is such a high focus, and it's something that's actually not in my article. It's a focus of our article and resource for the portfolio. But yes, how you treat layoffs is crucial in how you also build engagement for the remaining people. Offering things like, maybe you don't have a great budget for severance packages, you can still offer COBRA to make sure the employees and their dependents are covered from a medical standpoint. So that's something a lot of companies are doing when maybe budgets are not in place. You can let them keep their equipment. And you could also, like you mentioned, provide some really key introductions to people like myself that can help them potentially land another job.
So when it comes to the concept of quiet quitting, I mean, like, is this something that you're seeing just across the board? And I mean, is there like, I guess we could like getting into bucket two, right? Gathering feedback of your article. I'd love to learn more about that because again, when it comes to the quiet quitting, I feel like a lot of it does come down to the communication aspect. And I suppose like feedback, I want to learn more about what you mean by that. Does that mean surveys? Is that like based primarily on one-on-one conversations? But really dialing into the pulse of like your employee base to figure out if this like there's a lack of engagement, or if they're like, as it, the kind of buzzy term quiet quitting is happening like within your org. So when you say gather feedback, like what really goes into all of that?
I think one-on-one conversations are great for that, but at the same time, we do see some reluctance, especially when layoffs are going on, for people to be honest, with their managers. So that's where surveys that are confidential are an incredible tool for people teams and for leaders to actually get a pulse on what's going on within their organization. So running very often EMPS and employee happiness surveys, it's a really effective tool for that. You also want to ensure you're using it correctly, because in my line of work, I actually see a lot of EMPS scores and the questions and the results, and also the action plan that follows. You want to make sure that you're not just asking leading questions. Even the order the questions are asked is relevant. You want to uncover the truth, and also you want to encourage people to be honest. It's not enough to say everything is confidential. We're not going to know. You actually need to say the information we're gathering will inform better decisions, will help us change your experience working here. So it's incredibly important for you to be honest in your replies for us to actually move the needle. Another thing that I'll say here, you need a plan, because you collect this great wealth of data, but then what do you do with that? You need to analyze those results, and you need to actually develop it into a plan that will change the conditions, and then communicate that plan. So you address the concerns, but also address them and solve them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And for those folks, ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score, scoring system designed to help employers measure employee satisfaction and loyalty within their organizations. What I think I see is organizations, VCs, are very people focused. There's this, how do we brand top level talent attraction, optimize our offering and everything that goes into converting top talent into employees. We see a lot of that. And I think in market contractions, the shift completely goes away from people. And the shift goes into analyzing spreadsheets, going into, net revenue retention. How do we maximize our existing customer base and retain that customer base? And what's happening to our top line revenue, and what's our burn look like? And rightfully so, you have to be on top of these things. And in upmarket, it's growth at any cost. Capital is basically free, and it's forever flowing. And now it's a very highly limited and valued resource. And the thing is that, there's the issue is, if you're too hands off with people in a down market, you're going to lack the employee engagement that's going to help you pull up, particularly when you look at your revenue organization from customer success to new business sales. If you don't have high employee engagement, people are going to start to think like, is the point, right? And start to lose that. So I think by investing in these surveys, it's not enough you can't take the approach of like, well, there's less jobs, so we don't really need to focus on folks because they're not going to be able to move as easily. And, if that is approach that's kind of going through the back of the mind, or, hey, we're too caught up in these spreadsheets, like we just don't have the time. Because if you can get people engaged and to really recalibrate on the mission, which I know was another thing that was in the first bullet, you say get people clear and engaged on the goal. That's the difference many times that helps you sustain that revenue number. It's like, hey, we got to close X MRR by end of quarter. Let's make sure people are fully engaged in making that happen, versus just saying, okay, if we don't hit this number at the end of the quarter, we're going to cut another 10, 15% of staff, right? So I think people underestimate the importance of focusing on people in a down market. It's like, have you see what I'm saying? It's like all the focus is in growth on people, but then in a downturn, it's like we're just looking at spreadsheets and not really considering it as much.
Sure. What's interesting is that a lot of these things are happening while we have the new pay transparency laws coming into play. It's my perspective that it will completely change the job market. And so all of these things will kind of create a storm where great talent will still have options. Companies will always still want to hire that great talent, but now companies will need to show what they're offering. There needs to be a very clear outline, not only of bands, but also what do you stand for as a company? What is your compensation philosophy? How do you help people get from one level because you've offered them a band, so you're telling them you're at this level? How do you help them get to the next level? What resources do you have in place to help them get there? All of these things will be made public. Everything will be transparent. So it'll be very interesting to see how that affects the job market.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that you also mentioned is like expect and respond to bad reviews when it comes to the survey.
Yep.
So my whole philosophy on the surveys where, for my company's Secure Vision, is you have to, I think you mentioned this already, but you have to implement some of the feedback, because if you don't, then people aren't going to continue to give it. If you give people a platform to speak up and you can implement some of what they said, then they will continue to provide you with feedback. There's issues from an executive perspective is sometimes people want something that doesn't work at scale or doesn't work from a macro perspective, but they, from an individual contributor perspective, see something as, if we could just do it this way, it'd be so much easier. And you may know that you can't do it. And that might be something correlated to like a bad review. You still have to respond to that and provide some type of explanation of like, hey, I understand what you're looking for. We aren't unable to do it because of XYZ, but when we look at the business and where it could be a year from now, let's revisit that. And in the meantime, we got this suggestion from our employee base. Let's go ahead and implement that. And sometimes it's an easy lift, sometimes not so much, or maybe you don't feel it's a big deal, but you got to give people a win and help where you can. And as you said, like we should be responding to negative reviews or bad reviews in a very analytical way. Like this is how do we adjust these processes to remove frictions for employees so they have a better experience? And particularly in a down market, the last thing people need is friction. Like let's make their job as easy as possible because they're already stressed out about what's happening in the market.
Yeah, and I actually have a view in responses, and the majority of people talk about transparency. They want more transparency, and especially in a downturn, because they want to be able to prepare. A lot of the feedback I'm seeing is, I'm a main provider. I want to be able to prepare. I need to expect any changes. So please communicate as things are happening. So they want high communication, high transparency. Also a lot of great feedback on meetings. A lot of people talk about excessive meetings. That's predominant feedback. And then the third, but I think most important, they want more emphasis on wellness and mental health, because especially in startups, you see companies and leaders put such a high emphasis on performance, which absolutely 100% you need to have a focus on performance, but you really need to give employees a break, a respite. You need to give them something to collaborate on that's not work related, just to build that trust and that collaboration, obviously, within the team. So both are very important.
For sure. And I want to get into ways that companies can show employees that they're valued. And this is, from my perspective as a founder CEO, a difficult topic, because for many of the things that are tied to how to show employees they're valued, there's a dollar cost associated, and finding the opportunity cost, if you will, of, okay, hey, if we invest in this resource, it's going to help our top line, our margins. It gets very messy. And so at Secure Vision, we've had to cut down on some of the things that we were doing last year to show our appreciations of value and provide a work-life balance. So I'm excited to high level go over, in an ideal world, what companies can do, and then how we can think about how to do this in a down market, and what are some levers we can pull that maybe allow us to run a lean organization at the same time, if that makes sense. So like high
Mhm.
level, like what are the big things that employees look for when it comes to how they want to how they want to, or how they like to feel like they're valued within an organization?
Absolutely. So there's so many studies out there that showed PTO is a big factor here, and how you share it, how you structure it, really can drive engagement and performance. So we want to have competitive PTO, and that it obviously helps with employer brand, it attracts candidates, but having real conversations, and especially managers leading with example when they feel burnout, then they'll take a day off and they'll talk to their team. Listen, I've been working so much. I need a few days. I'm going to take a few days. Don't contact me on Slack. I don't want to get any emails. And that's healthy. You need to have that disconnect in order to come back to it refreshed and actually do a good job. And you also want to have these conversations openly with managers, and make sure that there's not going to be a retaliation if you say I need some time off. So there needs to be this trust and this really healthy environment where people can share these things. But also having a some structure with your PTO policy. Obviously in tech, unlimited PTO is now pretty much the norm. I think it was something like 71% of companies are offering unlimited PTO, but there's a right way to do it and a wrong way. And there's research showing that people are actually taking less time off when they're offered unlimited PTO. So you need to put some parameters in there. What approval looks like. There needs to be a consistent message from leaders and managers. And so all of these things together would encourage people to also work hard, but relax. Another, I guess, great way to show appreciation would be a 4-day work week. It doesn't happen. It's not very popular right now, and that is also pretty controversial. We do see companies being very successful employing this tactic, even in a downturn. And also, I don't know if you're aware, but Maryland signed into effect a 4-day workweek bill, which will provide employers with incentives to pilot this program. So there are conversations going around around this topic. So we'll see how that's going to impact the job market.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really interesting that Maryland's doing that. For everybody tuning in, we will add a link to that article directly in the description of this episode, so you can check it out and get some more details there. Circling back real quickly to PTO, we did shift to an unlimited policy this year. We did a survey, 70% of our team preferred an unlimited policy.
No
And I
surprise.
think no surprise, but what's interesting is that for a fair amount of reasons as an operator, there's actually benefits for both that I think operators should be looking into from a employee perspective as well as an employer perspective. And that's something you could talk to your CFO about. Beyond that, we also implemented a minimum PTO policy. So we were doing prior a 4-week policy with a minimum 2. We're doing unlimited, but I believe we've kept in place the minimum policy. And our, the direct manager of the folks, the individual contributors, is tracking that. I mean, not, every month, but like on a quarterly basis, going through like, okay, who's taking PTO, who hasn't, right? So I think whether or not you have like a finite 3-4 week PTO policy or unlimited, as a best practice, you really should have a minimum policy in place. And again, there are benefits from a employee perspective and employer perspective that companies need to look into there. But that is something that I found to be quite valuable, having that minimum policy in place for the team. And it kind of drives the culture in the direction of like, hey, it's okay if I take time off. Of course, it's not like we're changing the objectives or outcomes that need to be reached by folks, but we're showing that, hey, we're invested in you and your well-being. In a down market, it's like, hey, we're gonna have to work our tail off here and go the extra mile. And also, we're still investing in you as a person. We know that because you're going to be working even harder, we want to make sure that you're taking some time for yourself to recharge and spend time with your family, so on and so forth. So minimum policies are you seeing a lot of those out there, or is that still kind of like few and far between?
Oh, that's another best practice I think companies need to implement. There's a lot of HRISs, HCMs that will keep track of that and actually give reminders to the employees themselves, but also to their managers. Hey, this person has not taken time off in 6 months. Check in on them.
Right.
Are they okay? So there's technology that actually helps us achieve some of these best practices. Another practice that I love, and especially because we actually put that in place at Secure Vision, is a wellness day or a mental health day company-wide. It basically connects with a holiday. So let's say you have 10 or 11 observed national holidays per year. It would connect to an extra day off, resulting in 10 or 11 3 or 4 day weekends per year. So you have a ton of benefits because it's basically you're not going all the way to giving people 4-day work weeks, but you're still giving them enough time to truly disconnect. And there's something that goes on in your brain when it's the weekend, for example, when you know the entire company or most of your company is off, where you can truly relax. And there's no messages coming on Slack, there's no, or few emails. So just going back to that, to that desire to truly disconnect and avoid burnout, I think it's such an effective policy to have in place. And especially because you can advertise it, and you can quantify it. So it's something that you can put on your careers page, or something you can put on your job descriptions, and it shows what you care about as an employer. You care about mental health. You're trying to do as much for your employees as possible, so you have an actual program in place. What's really cool is that now we have global teams. So each country will observe their own set of holidays, which means for bigger teams, you'll actually have someone working. And, especially for support teams, you need 24-hour support. You'll still have that company engagement. And of course, if you have people in your team that are all from the same country, you can do things like someone takes Friday off, another portion of the team takes Tuesday off, whatever that looks like. There's definitely ways to structure it so it works for everyone.
For sure. And I think there's one section where you talk about team building events, and I think where that also kind of took my mind is, there's this whole, we're talking through, does it make sense to, as a culture, we're talking through, does it make sense to stay remote, hybrid, in office? I definitely see benefits to in office. However, for my company, I have decided to remain completely remote. I like what that does to my P&L in terms of our margins. It allows me to say, okay, where can I allocate some of that capital into activities that are going to drive top line growth, opposed to putting that in an overhead or just an office space expense. So I like running lean from that perspective, but I don't totally disagree with companies that are looking to do hybrid, as long as they're able to compete. They're in a market where they can, and they have the margins to compete for competitive talent. But I will say that one thing that I've seen a couple companies do that I think is pretty smart is they're taking the budget that they could have spent on office space and they're putting together offsites, maybe for leadership quarterly and for the entire team annual, or there's a bunch of different ways to split it. But in that way, it's like, some people say, well, there's creativity and collaboration and the relationships, and it just drives, engagement and this type of stuff. Like, okay, well, I think you can do that in somewhat consistent company offsite, so you get that element. And people are generally going to, I think, overall, are going to be happier about that. They'd much rather go to every once in a while, a company offsite, get together everyone and have it in a structured way where you're actually working versus just, drinking or whatever. I think that people would much prefer that to saying hybrid in office twice a week. Of course, there's a few of us, like for me, for instance, I love my boring office. So, I like being in a boring room that helps me concentrate, but, a lot of folks don't, right? And it's easier to attract talent. So like, what are your thoughts? I've got, when you're saying team building, are you also looking at like offsites as a component of that, or what else are you looking at beyond offsites as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think the key word here is flexibility. People love flexibility, especially when they've been so rigid for such a long time in an office environment, and you get used to that, and then your world is turned upside down with the pandemic, and now you're home all the time, so just you're adjusting to that new reality. So I think the feedback we see more often come through is you want a little bit of both. You still want some face time with your teammates and with your leaders, but at the same time, you want to make your own time, and you want your work to be based on results and not time spent into the office. I think that what the pandemic did was shift this mindset of, okay, how many hours are you putting in to what are the results, what is your output? And I think that's a really important shift that should continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And, I think there's other things you mentioned here in the article that I highly recommend to folks tuning in, take a look at. We will also drop the link to the article in the description. So you'll have access to Raluca's, look at it right now, Raluca's LinkedIn account, access to the article, to the Maryland bill. Make sure to check out those resources. Raluca, we are coming up on time. I feel like this is a good stopping point. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today and for contributing to the show. We really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it was a blast. Thank you.
For sure. And for everybody else tuning in, thank you so much. It's been so cool to see Scale by Design rising up through the rankings for venture capital on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you know anybody that is a general partner or a senior level person within the VC community that you think would make a good guest, maybe it's you, someone you know, please let me know. Feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. And also, if you're getting value from the show and you like it, please leave us a review on wherever you're listening to podcasts. We really appreciate you. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next week. Take care.